Cheers. Yeah, see, Allison, it's weird. Appreciate that.
Keep going. Give us a little more love, Michael.
Yeah, right.
So everybody knows, you should know, you are listening to the music of Michael Boezi. I actually posted in our chat that Michael is a member of a band called the Rockmores. You can find, if you want to find more, you can look up the Rockmores, ROCKMORES, right, Michael?
That's right.
.com.
TheRockmores.com.
Yeah, therockmores.com, or also michaelboezi.com/music. Michael, you want to give us one more?
Sure.
And then I think we'll get going, but people are trickling in. Let's give them a little bit of time. Welcome, everybody. Settle in. All right, so as the only one who's unmuted, I'm going to go ahead and do yay!
Everyone.
Thank you, Michael. So one more time, before we get into anything else, I just want to tell everybody, you were just listening to Michael Boezi of the Rockmores, and if you want to know more of his music, you can check out therockmores.com. They actually have something awesome right now, which is called the social distancing sessions, right? That's what you call it?
That's right.
And they're posting it, and it's really fantastic. So you should check out the Rockmores. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I am Jeremy Fischer, and before we do anything more, I just have to say, Corey Champagne, your background rocks. So right there, my daughter would be very pleased. So my name is Jeremy Fischer. I'm working with a bunch of other friends. We've been putting this on. This is our third Inside Voices, Stories and Drinks for Adults. So settle in. We are really excited to have you. This is put on by a group of friends and a small group called Boston for All. I am representing Boston for All in this. We are really excited that you're here. Just so you know, before we even begin, we have already raised through your donations $1,025 for the Family Relief Fund established by Boston City Councilor Julie Mejia. And that is great. What they do is they are providing money for people to be able to shop at local bodegas. So, oh, there it is. Sorry, I didn't know that was coming. And so what we have is just this great opportunity for people to, one, be able to get food when they need to, and also we are supporting local businesses to be able to thrive during this time that's hard in a really awesome way. So thank you so much for that. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my very good friend, Andrew Turco, who is, by the way, the brains behind this operation. And take it away.
Thanks, Jeremy. We're so excited that you're here. We're so excited that we get to give all of you here a night away from all the insanity. So I'm so excited that you decided to be a part of this. I'm excited that we are raising money for a great cause. You know, in the past when we've done this, we really, you know, we were kind of pushing the fundraising a lot, but it's not so much about raising money tonight. It's about giving you an escape from all the craziness that's happening out there right now. So for this one night, for these 2 hours, we are gonna celebrate travel. We're gonna celebrate getting away, and we are gonna give you the gift of escape through good stories, a beer presentation, and some amazing music. I know it's been a little while that we've been in this position, and so I'm trying to come up with different ways of counting time other than days, because counting the days was bumming me out. So one of the ways that I've done it is vet bills. Our dog we are roughly $2,320 into vet bills of the pandemic. There's been 6 nights where we've had cake for dinner, so 6 cake dinners, and there's been a fair amount of social distancing. So it's been a time. So I want everybody to just kind of take a breath, take it all in, and have a great time tonight. Our first storyteller, she's the Director of Education at the Leventhal MAP, an education center at Boston Public Schools, Boston Public Library. She spends time teaching kids and teachers how to use and make maps and engage citizens. Michelle, I want you to know that I try to include cartography into as many jokes as I can. It's a fantastic word. She's a resident of Roslindale. She has 3 wonderful girls, and she is a transplanted Southerner, but a long-time avid Bostonian. Michelle, we're so excited that you're here. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I want to start this story on a cold day in February in 1993 when I boarded the RE 1496 as a very self-conscious anthropology student. But I got off that train as the German lead in an international play. I had spent the previous 2 weeks traveling around Holland and Belgium with a very blonde American boy named Travis, who wanted seemingly a lot more from me than I really wanted from him. He had spent most of our trip just kind of screaming about American exceptionalism and complaining about 2 small cups of coffee. So I decided that it was definitely time for me to branch out on my own. I didn't really have a plan, but the best one I could come up with was maybe Norway or Malta or Crete. All of those seem like good locations when you don't know where to go. But I took the practical route, and I called the only soul that I knew within 500 miles, a former Girl Scout camp counselor who knew me as Saucy, and I knew her as Tater. Now, just to give you some background on Tater, she was tall, leggy, beautiful, curly hair, full of self-confidence, and also studying in Nuremberg on a Fulbright art history scholarship. So amazing. And at this point in my life, you know, I'm 20 and I'm channeling my ennui and self-doubt into filthy bars and a fling with a guy who claimed he was the karate champion of Africa. I could never substantiate that. And tried to prove it every night by kicking off light switches with his foot. So I figured out how to say Zimmer 5, room 5, I think, in German, and called up Tater. And we made an arrangement to meet in a train station 2 days later. So at this point, I'm also feeling sorry for myself, of course. There's no one within thousands of miles who knows me well, but I board this train, and a couple of days later, I'm in Nuremberg. And Tater and I have arranged kind of a loose meetup at this point. So she informs me, you know, this is pre-cell phone days, so you sort of arrange, if we're gonna meet at a time, and you don't know if that's actually gonna happen or not, kind of exciting. So she tells me that she'll be off with her art history students on a field trip that day, and I think, you know, whatever they were doing, chasing down Albrecht Dürer, Prince, or Grunwald the Younger, those are the only German artists I know, whatever they were doing. So she said she might actually be a little bit late. So I had a lot of time to kill in Nuremberg before I catch this local train. And it's February, it's about 15 degrees out, and I wander around the city in my too thin pea coat. Again, get the idea. Feeling very sorry for myself at this point, not really knowing who I am, my goal in life, as we all, or a lot of us, felt at that age. So a whole day goes by, and it's time to board the train to meet Tater. So on this train, there is a woman who's sitting a couple seats in front of me, and she has long dark hair, and she is reading aloud in English in a German accent from a series of dog-eared pages. And she's gesturing wildly. She's reading aloud to herself, and she stops from time to time to take notes and make highlights. And I watched her with a lot of fascination. She clearly had a passion for whatever she was doing, but mostly I looked out the window and thought about where I was headed. When the train came into the station, I had a single backpack. I collected that, and I walked past this woman who was taking her time collecting her papers and her coat and her snack wrappers and everything. And I went out into the station, and I parked myself on a bench, expecting that I would wait a while, considering that Tater had said that she might be a little late. So I was very surprised when a large, jovial-looking woman approached me and said something to me in German. What I heard was Michelle. And I said, yes, because this is often a sound strategy when someone says something to you in a language you don't understand. But I did feel like I needed to follow that up a little bit. So I said, did Tater send you to pick me up? Yes. She grabbed my backpack, and I followed her out to her waiting car, which was another bit of a surprise because Tater had told me that her dorm was about a 5-minute walk from the station. But I got in, and we started to drive. I asked her name. Her name was Laura. And I said, Laura, you must like art history. You must be a student of art history. She told me in somewhat broken English that no, in fact, she was an organic biology major. Huh. She asked me, you must like the theater. To which I paused and I said, thinking about it, well, I've seen a lot of theater. I auditioned once for Our Town in high school, a role I did not get, by the way. Very sad about that. But we continued to drive, and our line of questioning went back and forth, asking as best we could in our native languages, but mostly we responded to one another with a single word, yes, over and over and over again. About 20 minutes later, we arrived on the outskirts of town, and we pulled into a parking lot, and there's a small squat building there. It's very dark. And there's a single sign on the building lit by a single bulb, and it says theater on the outside. So I asked Laura, I said, is Tater inside? Yes. All right. So I grab my bag. I thank Laura for the ride. She pulls away, and here I am at this building. So I walk around the building. The doors are locked on the front. I try them all. And I go around to the back of the building till I finally find a single door that is open, and I pull it open. Now inside, there's a smoky room filled with people. And when I opened the door, 25 heads looked up at me. And suddenly they burst into glorious applause. And in that moment, I thought to myself, what an amazing group of art history students that they're so friendly to visitors coming to see them in their class. Now, rising from one of the chairs, a very thin man with a black turtleneck sweater on and close cropped hair and little round glasses, and he's holding a smoldering cigarette. And he stood up and he took a long drag, and he looked at me and he said in German accented English, "Hello, Natasha. How was your train trip?" And in that moment, I truly, as I processed perhaps what had happened, that they actually didn't know what Natasha looked like. And that this could have been a very interesting opportunity for me, someone who didn't really know my direction in life at that point, that maybe this was the place that I could drop into and no one would know. But the best that I could muster in that moment was, Natasha? Who's Natasha? I'm Michelle. Where's Tater? They brought me into the room and we pieced together what had happened. But they gave me a lot of beer and a lot of cigarettes. And they told me about their German-Israeli production that they were rehearsing and would go up on the stage in 2 months' time. And it sounded wonderful. And I waited a while. Laura was called and she returned again, this time with a very peeved Natasha in the passenger seat. And Laura looked very sheepish herself. And we passed each other in the parking lot and we exchanged sort of shy smiles and glances. But I got back in the car with Laura and I went back to the station. And when I walked in, the station was totally empty except for poor Tater, who was sitting forlornly on the bench that I had left hours earlier, looking confused. And I went up to her and we exchanged a big hug and a big laugh after I told her what had happened. And I was grateful in that very moment to have someone to share that new story with. Thanks.
That was great. Thank you. Hold on, thank you so much. You know, one of the things I love about travel stories, I think we're still pinned on Michelle. You may at some point get the vibe during this entire experience that this is not a multi-million-dollar endeavor. And that's fine. But we're doing our best here. And we're gonna have a lot of fun tonight. Not everything's gonna go right. Some things are gonna go, sideways. But I'll guarantee one thing. We're gonna have some fun. And just like many travel tales, and just like your travel tale, some awkward things are gonna happen. And just like you would on any traveling adventure, we're gonna bounce back and have fun. And that's just how we're gonna run it. I loved your story. I love the way that we can get into situations when we're traveling and just shake it off and move forward. In that same situation, if we were to do it at home, we would be so mortified and just think life was over. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about, getting away and just kind of leaving yourself at home. I also liked your friend who liked telling people about American exceptionalism. I think there is no better way to rid the world of American stereotypes than to tell people abroad how awesome we are. It's the gift that we can give. So, let's keep things rolling, folks. Our next storyteller, really good friend of mine. He was my roommate in college. He's a 6th-generation farmer. He's born and raised in New Jersey. He and his family have owned and operated Bullock Farm. So if you're down in central Jersey around fall, they have a big harvest festival. I've never made it there. I've definitely liked the pictures on Instagram. Brett is also a full-time brewer. He co-owns Screamin' Hill Brewery that's based on the family farm. They grow everything that goes into their beer on the farm. And he's going to be telling us about a road trip that he took with one of our other college buddies where he accidentally impersonated a Mexican drug trafficker and almost got killed. Brett, take it away, man.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for listening to my story. So my story starts back in 2004. We graduated college in 2002, so it was a couple of years after college. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with myself after college. I knew that I liked to ski, and a buddy from high school knew some guys that were working at a ski lodge out in Alta, Utah. So I decided to tag along with him and spend a couple of winters out there just being a ski bum. So I did that for a few years. The second year, I got our other college buddy, Dan, to come out with me. So he and I worked in the restaurant of the ski lodge at Alta, and we lived in a dorm room above the garage at this lodge along with all the other employees, and had an absolute blast. But this season was coming to a close. Most people were heading on to their next seasonal gig, or just hitting the road and going somewhere. I had decided to go back home to New Jersey. I was, as Andy said, I was raised by really hardworking farmers, and they weren't entirely thrilled by the idea that I decided to graduate college and then go bust tables for $90 a week and ski every day. So I thought maybe it was time to go home and get a job. I didn't have much of a plan of how I was going to get home. I didn't have a car, and I didn't really want to have to pay for a flight home. So I figured I was just going to bum a ride home. I ended up tagging along on a little road trip where some guys were going to go down to Baja, California, and do some camping on the beach and surf. So there were 4 of us that were going to head down there. We had 2 cars. Before we left the lodge, we ended up pilfering a few things from the lodge that we didn't think they were going to need anymore. One of the guys was a bartender, and he told us that they were going to throw out all the bottles of booze from the whole bar, all the bars in the lodge. They were going to throw out all of the bottles that had been opened. So it was every booze you could think of, from vodka to peach schnapps and Grand Marnier. We had everything you could think of at a fancy ski lodge bar. We had 2 cardboard boxes full of open bottles of booze. So we took that on our trip, and we also took a gigantic block of Cabot cheddar cheese. It was the greatest prize to have cheese in your car during the trip. It was kept in a cooler that started out with some ice but got really warm and sweaty as the trip went on, but it always had a Letterman stuck in it for carving off cheese snacks, and it was the best part of the trip. So we left Alta, we got on our way. We picked up a couple of buddies in San Diego. One of them actually had a surfboard and a wetsuit and knew how to surf, unlike the rest of us that did not have any of those things and had never surfed. But we thought, what better place to learn than in Mexico? So we headed down into Baja. We had an absolute blast. We had 2 cars. There were 6 of us. And we just drove further south every day and explored Baja. It was absolutely beautiful. We ate amazing fish tacos at roadside stands every day. We had just beautiful camping spots, up on bluffs overlooking the beach, camped right on the beach, in the sand sometimes. We just had an absolutely amazing trip. We didn't do very much surfing. Again, we didn't really know how to surf, and we only had 1 surfboard, but we surfed for about a half an hour each one day and shared the same wetsuit. It was gross. So we were kind of winding down on our camping trip, and before we headed back to San Diego, we wanted to, it was Mexico, it was April. We thought there has to be some spring break activity going on somewhere. We wanted to find a town that was big enough to maybe have a couple bars and a motel, and maybe we could see some girls and have fun. So we looked on the map, and there was a town on the Sea of Cortez side. We had been on the Pacific coast the whole time. There was a town called San Felipe that looked, judging by the map, big enough to have, you know, a bar and a motel. So we figured that was our next destination. Looked like, based on the map, that we were going to have to drive all the way back up to Encinitas and then back down the other side of the peninsula to get there. And that was going to be a, I don't know, 14-hour trip. And that just seemed like too much. So we looked on the map, and there was clearly a little road that looked like it went right to San Felipe and started not far from where we were. So we asked a bunch of locals about the road, and they all said, yep, that is a dirt road that goes through the mountains and will take you pretty much right to San Felipe. And they all said, definitely don't take that road at night, and absolutely never take that road without four-wheel drive. So that's exactly what we did. We left at about, I don't know, 7 o'clock at night with 2 vehicles that did not have four-wheel drive. In fact, both cars weren't even in the greatest shape. The one car was an Eagle Summit that was about to split in half. We were worried, so we ended up taking a lot of luggage out of that and putting it in the Ford Ranger, which was the other car, because we were worried that the Eagle Summit was just going to split in half. This road, once we got on it, we realized was so bad. Both cars were standard transmission. You couldn't get out of second gear in either car. That's how rocky and bumpy the road was. And it just wound up and down through these mountains. There were parts where it was just a straight cliff up one side and a straight cliff down the other side. And it was a pretty gnarly road. And we realized pretty quickly that it was probably a bad idea, but we figured we're already here. We're already on the road. What's the worst thing that could happen? Let's just keep going. So we did. We kept going very slowly and making very little progress, but we kept going down this mountain road, and it was completely desolate. We saw no signs of civilization as soon as we got on the road. No houses, no other cars, not even a rundown old barn. There was absolutely nothing. So we had been going for maybe 4 hours at this point. It was close to the middle of the night. We had already had one flat tire on the truck, and we had to change that on the side of the mountain. And we got to a point where I was in the Ranger, which was driving second. The Eagle Summit was up in front of us, and it looked like it had come to a stop. And we pulled up slowly behind it. It looked like there were headlights facing towards us. So we just assumed they were, stopping so they could get around each other. So we got up closer and realized that as our eyes were adjusting to the light, that it wasn't headlights. It was a really big spotlight. And so we're trying to figure out what we're looking at. And we slowly realized that our friends aren't in the car anymore. They're actually standing on the side of the road. And then as we look more, we realize that they're being held at gunpoint by a bunch of guys wearing sweatpants. And they were really big machine guns. There was probably 8 or 10 guys yelling and screaming at our friends. And, at this point in the trip, we had seen quite a few military checkpoints with guys wearing military fatigues, holding guns. And so we had kind of gotten used to seeing guns on the trip. However, these guys were wearing sweatpants, a little bit of camouflage. But I remember thinking, are these good guys or are these bad guys? I don't know what's going on. So as that thought is happening, our car gets surrounded by more of these guys. They tear open our doors, they grab us, rip us out of the cars, and at gunpoint drag us up next to our friends. So, here we are on the side of a road, probably 5 hours from anything in the middle of a Mexican mountain range. And I'm thinking, now I'm pretty sure these are bad guys. They're not good guys. And I'm just thinking, these guys, this is it. This is why they told us not to take the road. I can't believe we didn't listen. What morons we are. And I remember thinking, this is going to be it. They're going to kill us. There's no way. And I remember thinking, best case scenario, they're going to steal everything we have and just leave us here for dead. But I was pretty sure that was the end of it. And no one's ever going to find us because we're in the middle of nowhere. So as I'm having this realization, I look over and I see Dan getting out of line. As the guys are still holding us at gunpoint, the guns are drawn and they're yelling at us. Dan just starts walking back over to the Eagle Summit. And, I didn't speak any Spanish at the time, but I was pretty sure the guys wanted us to stay on the side of the road in line, but Dan didn't care. He just, wanted to go over and do something. I didn't know what he was doing, but he walked over to the summit, and I see him kind of kneel down or bend over and start rifling through the front seat of the car and trying to find something. And I'm thinking, what is he? I don't know what he's getting. But these guys are going to kill us, and Dan's trying to get something out of the car. I don't know what it is. So Dan finally stands up and starts walking towards us, back towards these guys. And, I can see that he's got something in his hand. I don't know what it is at first. There's just some little thing in his hand. And then I slowly realized that it was his journal. He got his journal out of the car while we were being held at gunpoint in the middle of a Mexican mountain road. So fortunately, the guys didn't murder us. We made it out of Mexico, and we learned some stuff when we got home. We learned that was the Tijuana drug cartel's trafficking road. That's the only reason anybody would take that road, because it was for trafficking drugs, and we were in the Tijuana drug cartel's space. We also learned that Dan kept that journal because we were young, having a lot of fun, doing quite a bit of partying, and a lot of crazy stuff like that was happening. So Dan kept the journal so he didn't forget any of those crazy things. And so I like to think that Dan still keeps that journal, and I'd like to think hopefully I'm still making some stories in there, but I'll never forget that time that we almost got murdered on the side of the road in Mexico for impersonating drug dealers accidentally.
Oh,
Thank you all.
woo.
The thing I love so much about that story is I heard that story from Dan like 2 years before Brett told me, and Dan's version was so reasonable, and there was no mention of any journal. And I met Dan and Brett both at the University of Vermont, and to this day, Dan is the only one of my friends who I've ever looked in the eye and said, out of all of my best friends, I hate you the most. Thanks, Brett. I've heard that story like 10 times now, and I still love it. I still love it, man. All right, so let's keep this rolling, folks. Next up is one of my favorite people. I met Alyce working at MIT. She worked at MIT for 30 years. She focused on diversity, inclusion, equity, as well as executive leadership coaching, change management, and talent management. She is semi-retired right now. She's transitioning to living in Southern California. Alyce, I have great news. Dan lives in Southern California. She's going there to join her family, her 2 grandchildren. And I want to tell you something about Alyce. I love Alyce. She is one of the warmest people I've ever met. Alyce was at MIT for 30 years. She met me and abruptly retired. So, I love you, Alyce. I can't wait to hear what story you have to share with us. The mic is yours, ma'am.
Hey, wow. Well, thank you. This is kind of fun to be hearing stories, and hopefully you'll find this one interesting. Back in, let's see. So it kind of started when I first went away to school, and some of you are going to start to do the math, and I can tell you it was 1970. So it was 50 years ago, and it was move-in day, freshman year. My boyfriend David had disappeared, so I was looking for him, and I found him in this woman's room eating cookies. And so this woman, Judy, and I just started talking and found out that we were both from Boston, and we just kind of knew some of the same people, and so we just bonded over that. And Judy was a lot like me. We were kind of like the party people, she and I hosted a lot of different parties and that kind of thing. And in 1970, you can imagine what the climate was like. It was the year after Woodstock. So it was kind of a time of free love. And so that was kind of like fun. And so really what I want to tell you about are these amazing women that I met at this chance encounter at school and what happened after that. So Judy was really my roommate, my best friend, and again, we're a lot alike in that regard. And some of you in the audience know her and kind of know me. So, okay. Judy, then there was Annie. I met Annie the previous year. This is all at school, freshman year. And I had met her before because her sister and my sister were also at the same school, and she was kind of quiet, reserved, and I had met her through there. And then there was Cheryl. And Cheryl, on the other hand, was a little bit like Judy and I, a little bit on the wild side. She was a preacher's kid, and she wasn't getting along with her roommate. I wasn't getting really along with my roommate, so we switched. And it worked out well because she was then primarily living with her boyfriend. And so I basically had a single. And in those days, having a single room meant that it was party central. People came to me. So we were, excuse me. We were all first generation, with the exception of Cheryl, we were first generation to go to college. And so it was a very different experience for us. We were the few people of color in a predominant environment, so that it was a little bit challenging being at school. You know, I don't think it was the work, it was just the environment. It was so very different. And so I think because of that, it really formed a wonderful bond that we all had. So in school, we're hanging out, it's great. We finish and we all kind of go our own ways. Judy went on to a great career in New York. Annie actually moved to the Caribbean. And had a great environmental planning job. Cheryl got married and actually is still married to the same man that she married at the end of our freshman year. Amazing. And I came back home to Boston. Initially, I came back working for the city of Boston when they were desegregating the public schools. So those are the women that I feel are like some of my closest friends. And while we had different experiences as we grew older, we still tried to stay in touch in certain ways. So fast forward from college to we're facing 40. We're turning 40. What? So, you know, now that's a very distant memory, but it was the idea, the trauma of turning 40. And so Cheryl came up with an idea of us going to St. Martin. She had a timeshare. Let's go, let's hang out, let's do what we used to do when we were in school. And so it was interesting because then we fell into those same roles and those same relationships just to kind of cement it, just to make it feel right for us that we were hanging out, having a good time. So we go to St. Martin. This is great. And the concierge at the timeshare suggests a day. We want to go to the beach. Day at the beach. They suggest Dawn Beach. So I don't know if any of you have been to St. Martin, Dawn Beach. And at this point, it's like in the early, what is that? In the early, was that 80s or 90s? No, 90s. So we're going to Dawn Beach, and in this part of the Caribbean, the driving is on the opposite side of what I'm used to. So I do think I started driving, and I don't know if your experience with those roads, they're twisty, they're winding, it's all over the place, it's a little scary. And then we come to the turnoff for the beach, and it's straight up so that the beach is on the other side of this hill. So two things. One, I was not doing such a great job driving. And so we asked Annie, who had been living in the Caribbean, to actually take over because she was used to driving on the opposite side. And because I am deathly afraid of heights, I jumped in the back seat. I couldn't drive, I couldn't see, I kind of had my eyes closed. I was holding Cheryl's hand and squeezing them as we went up and up and up and up and up. And it reminded me of those streets that you see in San Francisco where you go up and you can't see the other side. Oh, all the way up and then down. And it wasn't too bad going down, but it was just the idea of it. Okay, so that's, that was an interesting journey just to get there. And so on the beach, there are a few people, and noticeably there is a naked fat man lying spread eagle on the beach. And so we're kind of looking around. I think we talked to somebody. We discovered it was a nude beach, and we didn't know that at the time. And so that was interesting. I had never been to a nude beach before. And the question for all of us is, well, do we go in nude or do we go in our bathing suits? And, again, we're from an era where things were a lot freer. And so we did and enjoyed it. And so, well, Cheryl and I did, and Annie did not. So that's okay. That's all right. So we're enjoying it. We're laying out the whole bit. And so, and what's interesting is when I thought about the travel and what's a great story, part of it is that traveling up to Dawn Beach and then it being a nude beach, and then the other pronouncement. So we're 40 years old. Cheryl and I have one child, she has two. We're in the midst of raising them, etc. And our friend Judy, the real partier, who has been living the single life all this time and hanging out and, living in New York and living in DC and having just a great old time, pronounces that she is going to have a baby. And we're just kind of dumbstruck as to why, what are you thinking? And both Cheryl and I, who have, who are going through it, were concerned that she didn't know what she was getting herself into. And I would still say that to anyone. You don't know, and people try to tell you, but you really don't know. And so we had an interesting conversation back and forth about, why now? And women have been having children at 40 all along. I think it was a surprise to us because it didn't look like that was the way her life was going. But she was resolute. She was going to have this baby at age 40. And interestingly enough, part of our argument was, well, by the time the baby graduates, you'll be like 58 years old. 58. Who can imagine being 58 years old? Well, I can, but at the time it was just such a surprise, and it seemed like, why would you do that? Well, she decided she was going to do it. I mean, she was resolute. She was going to do it, and that's great, and that was good for her. And actually, the upshot of that is she and her husband had the baby. That baby is now a grown woman and very well accomplished reporter. She's a sideline reporter for the NBA. So, okay, I guess it was the right decision for her, and I think that was great. I think those two events, and while they're not connected, they make the trip very significant. So even when I was preparing to tell a story about travel, I talked to Judy and Annie because we do this all the time. So we've now got a pattern that at 40 we traveled together and went somewhere. 50 was San Francisco. 55 was Santa Fe. 60 was Hawaii. 65 was Hawaii. And so when I was thinking of all the travel we've done, I was trying to figure out, so what was the most impactful one? And I think it was the first one because it started us on this journey of connecting all the time. And it highlighted our friendship. It cemented our friendship. And then I just think it was two crazy things happening between the nude beach and this pronouncement of this woman that we never would have thought would have done that. So I don't know. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. I'm done.
Thank you for your story and thank you for taking us down that crazy road. I personally believe that I would consider myself the farthest novice you can be on the clothing optional beach circuit, but I feel like there should be a sign when you are going onto a nude beach or a clothing optional beach that says, stop, close your eyes, think to yourself, what in your fantasies does this beach look like? You have that? Okay. It's the exact opposite of that.
I like that.
It never works out. It's always a big fella, small bathing suit, maybe a skin disorder. It's not good.
Like,
Not good.
it was not good.
I've always found that if a friend is ever saying they're thinking about having a children, advising them in any direction that is not in their best interest. I like to bring to the table that I'm a dog owner. I find that gets me a lot of street cred, and that it's pretty much the same thing. I think people have a lot of respect for dog owners and how it's like having a child.
Oh yeah.
If you had a kid who ate the same thing for every meal and napped for 21 hours, it's like having a child. It's pretty much very different is what anyway. Alyce, I love you so much. I miss you so much on campus. I'm so glad you were here tonight. And I think we are still spotlighting Alyce, who is far more attractive than I am, so that's fine. But I want to tell you something about Alyce. Alyce is one of those people who I've been able to spend more time with, and she's one of those people who like exudes class. And so we've had like dinner before, and it doesn't look like two colleagues having dinner. It looks like that is so nice of that woman to help that man.
Not true.
I miss you, Alyce. We are going to keep the night rolling, folks. The fun, the excitement doesn't stop here. Our next stop on this crazy train is our musical performance. Tonight, we're going to hear from Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter Alastair Moock. He's toured U.S., he's toured Europe, he's played the Newport Folk Festival. In 2006, he had twins, and he decided to change the focus of his music to do more work in some children's songs. And then in 2019, he returned to his singer-songwriter roots. He's doing some grown-up album release, and the Boston Globe calls him one of the town's best and most adventurous songwriters. We are so excited to have you here, Alastair Moock.
Mute myself. Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Alyce, that was great. It's hard. You're a hard act to follow, to tell you the truth. And Logan and Michelle, I loved your stories too. I've been here. I just I wanted to slouch. So now that I'm on, I'm sitting up straight. So I'm gonna do a couple of songs here, maybe 3 songs, and vaguely related to being on the road in one way or another way. This one is, maybe I'll move kind of further and further away from home with each song. This is called Dream. Walk on down the street, follow your own feet, listen to your heartbeat and forget the things you know. Breathe on in the air, the evening is your prayer. Just let yourself be there, walking down the road. This world is just a dream, floating down the stream. The moment is the only thing you need. Stop fighting against the current. The things that you determine, they aren't, and they weren't, and they're never gonna be. Think about the fact that you're just a little speck, a fleck upon an acorn in an ocean's raging storm. In the scheme of time and space, you leave no lasting trace. The troubles that you face,
Horrible. This is so horrible.
this world is just a dream, floating down the stream. The moment is the only thing you need. Stop fighting against the current. The things that you determine, they aren't, and they weren't, and they're never gonna be. The simplicity of Darwin, the flowers in the garden, the molecules of carbon, and the things you never see are just below the surface of this agitated circus. Stop searching for a purpose when the point is just to be. This world is just a dream, floating down the stream. The moment is the only thing you need. Stop fighting against the current. The things that you determine, they aren't, and they weren't, and they're never gonna be. They aren't, and they weren't, and they're never gonna be. Thank you. Can you guys hear okay? Does the music come through okay with Zoom?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Great.
We can hear.
Yeah, you sound great.
Good. I've done a lot of Facebook events, but I haven't really done Zoom. And it doesn't, yeah, it's good for talking sometimes with music.
It's
But
true. It's true.
Everyone's doing it, Alistair. Everyone.
Everyone's doing it now?
Yeah, there's at least 35 people, 32 people, 35 people.
It broke up a little bit at the beginning,
Yeah.
probably because somebody, was talking when they shouldn't have been, but either way, after that, you sounded great, man.
Okay, great. All right, everybody shut up now. Just kidding. So Andrew mentioned I have twins. There's different kinds of trips to take, right? Different kinds of journeys. We had a journey with with one of my kids, my daughter Cleo. When she was 5, she was diagnosed with cancer. And we went on a whole journey as a family that we never thought we would be on. And we came through it. And I wrote a song afterwards about that trip, a few years afterwards. Cleo's all healthy now and doing great. She's 13 now, so it's been many years, but you know, you process these things for a long time. And this was a song that came out of that. We're almost there, signs on the post, not sure where, but we're getting close. Yeah, it's been a bumpy ride, but we're all right, and we're almost there. We're almost there. That last patch was rough, the road's looking clear, coming up. Yes, it's been a bumpy ride, but we're all right. Almost there. Look at these kids asleep in the bag. Been through a lot, but they're back on track. Yeah, it's been a bumpy ride, but they're all right, and we're almost there. Look at those stars, that big old moon. Yeah, it's been a bumpy ride, but the sky's wide, and we're almost there. You looking good, you got a healthy glow. I know it's been a hard road to hoe. Oh, it's been a bumpy ride, but I'm by your side, and we're almost there. We're almost there. Signs on the post, not sure where, but we're getting close. Oh, it's been a bumpy ride, but we're all right. Almost there.
Okay, good. I like that.
Thanks, guys. I'll do one more song. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was thinking during all those stories about the travels that I've had, those of us who've gotten to travel, we're so lucky. You know, that perspective is singular, and it's so not available to so many people. My parents lived in Africa before I was born, in Kenya, and they continued to do a lot of their work in Africa for much of their careers. But we never lived there during my life. But during my junior year in college, I studied in Zimbabwe for a semester, and it was a wild ride. It's where I decided actually that I was going to be going to try to do this instead of doing what I went there to try to do, which was to figure out how to get involved in policy issues and poverty stuff. And I realized I was no good at any of that. But instead of doing all that, I ended up working with a dance and drumming group called Botany. They made me stand at the back because I'm a very awkward dancer. And I was the only white guy in the group. But the most amazing adventure I had there was I went to this Mbira ceremony. I took a few, you know, an Mbira is the Shona word for a thumb piano. And I took a couple of lessons with this guy who's from a very famous family there of Mbira players. And he invited me to come to this spirit ceremony over the weekend. And spirits were gonna come down and visit. That was what I understood from it. So I went with my very Western sense of, you know, I have class Friday, I'll leave, I'll go to the spirit ceremony Saturday, I'll see the spirits Saturday and Sunday, they'll show up, and then I'll go home, you know, Sunday afternoon, get ready for class on Monday. And it ended up being like 5 days. The spirits were on their own schedule, and and it taught me something about kind of expectations and time, because I had a very like, let's go guys, spirits at 12 o'clock, right? They didn't come for days. And instead, everyone, to prepare, everyone just gets rip-roaring drunk and sits in these very smoky huts in people's rooms, and they play Mbira 24/7. And you really get lost. It just becomes an overwhelming experience. It was the most foreign feeling I've ever had, you know? It's to live in a country like America and to be the majority all the time is a very specific experience. And normally for most of us white Americans, we don't even realize that it's a cultural experience. When you go to a place where you become the minority, especially this weekend, you get to experience some of that outsideness. And I wish everyone could experience a little of both sides of that, right? Especially what we're going through in America this week, as we do every week in America. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to get so serious there. I'll do this one more song. This is a road song. It's called My Famous Leaving Song. Oh. Everybody wants to know where I'll be tonight. I won't tell them anything at all. They'll hear clap of thunder, see a flash of light. I'm gone, they're staring at the wall. That's right, I'm going. That's right, I'm gone. And another verse added to my famous leaving song. Order me a taxi, won't you put me on a train? Take me to the nearest outbound bus. Anyway I go, I'll be gone this very day. Leaving's how I keep from gathering dust. That's right, I'm going. That's right, I'm gone. Another verse added to my famous leaving song. I lost a screw on my harmonica holder, everybody. So I got to chase it around down my neck. It's very unprofessional. I mean, Bob Dylan would be so depressed to know I was doing this. Love is such a fleeting thing. Your eyes upon the door. How's a person person never really know. When you're on that platform, you've never been so sure you're leaving when you hear the whistle blow. Here we go. Yes, and if you see my shadow, say hello to me. We haven't seen each other for a while. He used to follow close wherever I might be, but company has always cramped my style. That's right, I'm going. That's right, I'm gone. And another verse is added to my famous leaving song. When I die, the Lord will come to take my body home, but he won't find me anywhere in sight. My ashes scattered to the wind, I'll leave no tooth or bone, and vanish like a whisper in the night. That's right, I'm going. That's right, I'm gone. Yet another verse is added to my famous leaving song. That's right, I'm going. That's right, I'm gone. And another verse is added to my famous leaving song. Thanks, everybody.
Alastair, thank you so much, man. We're so excited that you're here, and we're so happy to hear your music and hear your words, and we could not be more appreciative. And thank you for helping us help other people.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to turn the mic over to Jeremy for a minute. Jeremy had a couple things he wanted to say.
I mute myself. Hi, everybody. So I am actually going to admit to being starstruck for a second. And just to say how excited I am, we all are, but I'm going to speak for myself at least a little bit, that we got to have you play Alastair. I admit, I think we saw that Zoom has some limits for sound, but I think you're still fantastic. And I just sort of want to let everybody know who we just heard from. When Boston for All started, it actually started with deciding to try to do a couple of things to raise money for some good organizations. And we did some things where we had a run and we had a small concert. And at the same time, I knew that there was another concert in Somerville that I could go to that was being put on that had some like really big names in the folk music scene. And it was held at once in Somerville. And that's a big venue. And it had, I think it had Peter Mulvey, and it had, goodness, I don't even remember all the names, all the people who came. And it didn't shock me one bit to know that the person who actually put that together was Alastair Moock. So this is a guy who does a ton for our community and has a lot of connections and really makes some incredible music. And I put it up there in the chat, mookmusic.com. That's the one, right, Alastair? That's the best way to go?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah.
Yeah, mookmusic.com. I would really recommend everybody check it out. Just some awesome music. And it was such a pleasure to have you. So I was being starstruck for a minute, and I wanted to just acknowledge it. So thank you for being here.
That's so sweet. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Honor.
Back to you, Andrew.
So when Jeremy first told me about Alastair, I didn't. Alastair, I'm gonna come clean here. Did not know a ton about your music, and as soon as I saw the John Prine album in the background, his face looking over your shoulder, you immediately had street cred with me. I'd heard some of your bluegrass stuff, and I liked it, but it really touched me when I saw that because I'm a huge John Prine fan. And my first dance with my wife when we got married in September was In Spite of Ourselves. And so it was really cool to see that. And the other thing I want to say is that you play bluegrass and blues? The government should be tracking you. You're a dangerous man. You're a threat to society. So thank you for playing with us. But it was great, man. That was so great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So folks, we're gonna keep the night rolling again. Our next storyteller is Allison Behr. She's a special education teacher. She's a mom. She's a lover of the outdoors and adventure. She was once a wild child, but now she lives under the law. I want to hear how she brings that into the story. That always makes me very nervous. It makes me feel like the FBI is going to be knocking on the door at any moment. I hope they don't. I hope we get to hear the whole story. She likes to be with her friends and family far and wide, whether in person or right now in these wacky times via Zoom. Allison, take it away.
Unmute.
Oh, you're
Allison, you're muted.
Still muted.
unmute, please.
All right, here we go again. It was the summer of 1999, after my freshman year of college, and my good friend Kat and I had decided that we were up for an adventure. We came up with a plan. We were gonna drive from New Jersey all the way out to the West Coast, and then we were gonna come back again. We had it all planned. We knew where we were gonna stop, the whole thing. So then I told my parents about it, and they were like, absolutely not. You are not driving your car across the country. That's not happening. So it was back to the drawing board for Kat and I. We did a little bit of research and we cooked up a new plan. We approached my parents with like a new, safer plan. We were going to get what was called Ameripass. It was kind of like the Eurail, but for Greyhound buses. We were going to fly out to Vancouver. We were going to take Greyhound buses down the coast, and then we were going to go to LA and fly back. For some strange reason, even to this day, I don't believe, my parents thought that that was a safer plan than just driving our own car. So we convinced them we were going to do this. There was one stipulation. We had to have an itinerary. It had to be a detailed itinerary. It had to have all the locations we were going to stop at. It had to have the dates. It had to have everything. But sort of lucky for us, it was 1999. My parents weren't very internet savvy, and there was really no way to verify this plan at all. And to be totally honest, we had no intentions of following any part of this plan. We were going to fly out of Vancouver and figure out a way to get to LA. It was not going to involve a Greyhound bus. We were going to do it. We didn't know how, but it was going to happen. So off we went. We flew out to Vancouver with no plan of how to get to LA. We had 3 weeks to get to LA from Vancouver with no plan. So we said, you know what, we'll stay in Vancouver for like 4 nights. We'll figure something out. So sort of like attempt number 1 at getting a ride down to LA was, we'll rent a car. That's easy, why not? But we were 19, and it turns out it's really tough to rent a car when you're 19. So I was like, okay, next, we'll rent a U-Haul. You only have to be 18 to rent a U-Haul. We'll rent a U-Haul and we'll drive a U-Haul down the coast. I still don't understand this crazy rule. Why is it okay for 19-year-olds to drive a huge truck down a coast, but not to just drive like a normal car? But then we discovered that that was a fairly expensive venture to drive a U-Haul for 3 weeks. So we were like, not happening. All right, we'll just spend a few more days in Vancouver and we'll figure it out. So we were having fun, meeting people, going out. It's our 3rd night in Vancouver, and there's one of those like bulletin boards on the hostel wall, little advertisements everywhere, futon for sale, somebody's looking for a roommate, and then there it is, this beautiful thing, little white piece of paper, handwritten, 1980 Volvo, $300. We're like, oh, hell yeah. It was $19.99. We were in Canada. $300 was like 240 American dollars. We're like, we're down with this. So we call the owner named Bino. We meet with him. We see this not so beautiful car. We asked Bino, is this going to get us down to LA? And he said, you're lucky if it gets you down the block. And we said, we'll give you 240 Canadian dollars for it. And he said, okay. So we got the car. We were like, all right, we got the car. So it probably seems right now like we're pretty reckless 19-year-olds. kind of just living life like nothing. But we're like, we got to get license plates, registration, insurance. We got to do the whole deal, right, to make this legit. So we go to the registration place, and somehow we convince those very nice Canadians that we live in a youth hostel in Whistler, Canada. We give them the address of the hostel, and they give us insurance and registration, like no big deal. So we're set. The car is like legit. It's our car. We own this car, and we start our big adventure. This is just the beginning. So we have our car. It's a real beauty. Has 300,000 miles on it. Has a sunroof. You think that's so luxurious, except for the sunroof is being held up by a wooden stick so it doesn't come crashing down on our heads. That's the only thing holding the sunroof up. Luckily, it didn't rain a lot on our 3 weeks, because it would have just kind of come in, but we were okay. So we started our drive, and sort of the first obstacle was the border. We drive up to the border. We're still like giddy, like, oh my gosh, we bought a car. We're going to have a road trip like we wanted. And they ask us, did you buy anything while you were in Canada? And we go, yeah, this car. And they're like, come inside right now. So we're like, okay. So then we have to stand in front of border agents and convince them that we are just temporarily bringing the car to the US. We are visiting friends in Seattle for the day, and we're going to return the car back to Vancouver or back to Whistler afterwards, because it's apparently illegal to import a car and just like ditch it in the US. But once again, people sort of just trust us. They sort of just take us for our word, and we get our car past the border. That's sort of like obstacle number one. Obstacle number two, I don't know how to drive stick. Oh, by the way, the car is stick. Didn't tell you guys that. So it's stick shift. Luckily, Kat drives stick. So we kind of pull over in Washington State, and she's like, you're gonna drive, you're gonna learn right now. Like, we're not leaving until you can drive stick. So I try with her a little bit in the car, and I'm stalling out, I'm stressing out, I'm sweating, I'm getting angry. And she's like, I'm getting out of the car, and I'm gonna sit on this corner until you can get around the block without stalling out once. So I try, and finally I did it. And it's like, oh, I can drive stick. So we're on our way. Here we go. So we have all sorts of little things and fun things that happen along the way. We go to Forks, Washington, which is like the logging capital of the world, and where it is quite obvious that we are the newcomers in town. I think it's like a few thousand people in the town at the time. And within minutes, it's like everybody's like whispering, like, who are they? Who are these people in our town? So we have a good time there. We continue through Washington, see the Pacific Ocean for the first time in my life. And we get into Oregon, and we get to Crater Lake. And that is where we see our first hitchhiker. And I'm just like so naive and like, oh, everybody's so nice, no problem. So I pull over, and I say, Kat, we're gonna pick up this guy. So she's like, rolls down the window. Well, obviously she has to roll like an old car. She just roll down the window, and then she's like, are you armed? And the guy's like, no. So she's like, sorry, I gotta give you a pat down if you want to get in. So she like pats the guy down. He's like a kid like us. He's like 19, 20 years old. Turns out he's a super nice guy. We spend like the next 24 hours with him. We like go fishing with him. He's just a nice kid that is also kind of in for an adventure. No big deal. So we continue through Oregon, make our way to San Francisco, where, like Alice says, the roads are like, nah. Well, imagine being kind of like a new person to stick shift and driving up these like roads. I'll tell you, it's terrifying. It's terrifying if you're not driving stick, but if you're like new at it, like I cried a lot. There was like a lot of tears, but I got through it, which made me just, stronger person, better person for it. We got towed in San Francisco. We left it out one day. Cost us more money to get it out from towing than it did just to like buy the car. It was kind of crazy. We're like, okay, fine, it's okay, we can handle this. Then we start to make our way south into California, and into Southern California, and we go to Joshua Tree National Park. On our way to National Park, our tire just explodes. Like, it doesn't just like sort of putter out, it like explodes all over the highway. And luckily, sort of sketchy guy started helping us fix it. And then the cops came. I think that they were a little weirded out by this guy. Anyways, the whole thing worked out. We got a little donut on, and it was all good. And we kind of kept going. Then we get to LA, and we're visiting a good friend of my friend Kat's. And she has like this really steep driveway, and we like sort of try to like go down it with our car. And our whole entire muffler just falls off. Like the entire muffler just goes poof off the car. So then we were like, screw this. We're going to Rodeo Drive. So we take our 1980 Volvo that is just really not in good shape down Rodeo Drive with no muffler, like down Rodeo Drive. It's like with so much pride and so much excitement. Then it's kind of like, this is all coming to an end. Like, we did this. Like, we got a car, we got down the coast, we had all these great adventures, we met so many awesome people. What are we gonna do with this car? What's gonna happen to the car? What do we do? So we sort of like think about, like, can we just like leave it somewhere far away? This is like before Uber. You couldn't just like leave it somewhere and then call an Uber and like get picked up. It was a little, we didn't have cell phones. It was a little more complicated. So we were like, we thought about it and they were like, got it. Started to head to LAX, went right to LAX airport, turned right towards long-term parking, parked our car in a spot, nice covered spot to keep our car nice and protected, unscrewed the license plates, opened the glove box, took out the registration, took out the insurance, stripped the car down of everything that could identify us with it, said farewell to our car, which by the way was named Burnaby Beano Berard, after Beano, the guy who we bought it from, and Burnaby and Berard, the streets of our hostel. So we bade Burnaby Beano Berard farewell and thanked him for quite the adventure. That's my story.
Annie, sorry. That was fantastic. I loved your story. I'm so glad you wrapped up our evening of storytellers tonight. It's been an absolute blast. We have one more thing to show you tonight. One more exciting thing. Although the storytelling part of the evening, I'm sorry, we have a demonstration coming up next. That is not our last storyteller. We have Mike Smith coming up next. He is the technical director at Aeronaut Brewing in Somerville. He's been brewing beer professionally for the last 2 decades. He's worked at breweries, large and small. He's been involved with all aspects of the brewing industry, from keg filler to head brewer. Mike is also the co-author of the New York Times best-selling novel, New York Times best-selling graphic novel, A Comic Book Story of Beer.
And I'm sorry, I am going to do this, even though we said I wasn't going to step on you. Before we go any further, we do have another storyteller after that. Let's not forget Steve Almond afterwards.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I only heard Mike.
No, we have one more storyteller. Yep. So take it away, Mike. The floor is yours, sir.
Hi, howdy everybody. Hey, beer can tell a story too. So thanks for inviting me, and just want to talk a little. I was asked to, just throw a little beer knowledge down. Lots of tough acts to follow here, so please bear with me. But so this evening, to sort of follow along with the travel theme, I wanted to talk about IPA, India Pale Ale, which is itself a very well-traveled style of beer, which we'll find out in a second. But it's also changed quite dramatically in the last couple of years. And so you can see there's the sort of traditional American style IPA. It looks like this. See, I'm a brewer, I get 2 beers. And then there's also this newfangled New England IPA. And so I wanted to talk a little about beer, a little about what IPA is, and then just kind of give you a little peek into how we as brewers can manipulate the ingredients and a little bit of the techniques to get something like this or something like this out of basically the same thing. So pretty much every beer you've ever had in your life probably is made of malt, water, hops, and yeast. Those are the 4 big main ingredients. So pretty much every beer you've ever had in your whole life has been those made out of those ingredients. But by choosing what types of ingredients and using them slightly differently, we can come up with all sorts of different styles of types of beer. So even for, something from Bud Light all the way to Guinness is made essentially the same way. But we can, by picking and choosing the types of ingredients and how we subtly change our brewing techniques, we can get these different types of beer. An analogy I like to use is a cake recipe. So, if you have okay, I've got a cake recipe, but if you just tweak a little couple things with the same basic recipe, you can get a lemon cake, you can get a chocolate cake, you can get a pineapple upside down cake. So it's not totally different, but it's just how the subtle differences, subtle little tweaks in the minor ingredients. And to kind of show this example, I want to talk about IPA. There's 2 basic, well, there's many, many types of IPA, but the 2 I want to talk about today, this evening, are American IPA and this new England IPA. And so the beer judge certification program is it's the yardstick of how when professional, when people can be certified to judge beer, they go by these style guidelines. And so I just wanted to touch base on a couple of the style guidelines. So this is an American IPA. You can see the clear amber color. And this is a New England IPA. You notice how cloudy it is, a lot lighter in color. Cloudy, hazy being the operative thing there. So the beer judge certification guidelines for American IPA. These are the overall, they have all sorts of geeky technical things, but they also always boil it down to an overall impression. So I'm just going to read these out to you. For the American IPA, the overall impression is, they call it, it's a decidedly hoppy and bitter, moderately strong American pale ale, showcasing American or New World hop varieties. Balances hop forward with this is important, clean fermentation profile, dryish finish, and a clean supporting malt, allowing a creative range of hop characters to shine through. Okay, so the big things are they're clean, clear, dry, and hoppy. Bitter also. So now New England IPA, right here, notice how the clarity is different. This style actually just evolved within the last decade. And it was only officially recognized in 2018, so 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago now. But the guidelines, the overall impression for the beer judge certification program of New England IPA, it says an American IPA, subset of that one, with intense fruit flavors and aromas, soft body, and a smooth mouthfeel. Often opaque, with a substantial haze, less perceived bitterness than traditional IPAs, but always massively hop forward. Massively hop forward. This emphasis on late hopping, especially dry hopping, with hops of tropical fruit qualities, lends the specific juicy character for which this style is known. So hazy and juicy are the sort of like internet buzzwords for the New England IPA, where crisp is kind of the buzzword for American IPA. So basically, these are substyles of a historical IPA, which came about in England. And I'm gonna just read a little bit from my New York Times bestselling beer book, the comic book story of beer, but a little bit of, let's see, full color. But I just wanted, this is the little write-up that I wrote for in the book it's called the Meet the Beer, just to describe India Pale Ale. And this is more of the traditional India Pale Ale. So India Pale Ale seems to have evolved from aged or stock ales brewed in country estates and popular with the 18th century gentry, so rich people. Brewed to a high strength with lightly kilned pale malt and aggressively hopped, these beers were well suited for export. That's important. They matured in the cask on a long voyage to India, where they were enthusiastically enjoyed, chilled by upper class merchants and civil servants. Britons living on the Indian subcontinent found IPA quite suitable for warm climates. So basically, it was a real foo-foo beer. It was like you take it out for special occasions. It was like a rich person's beer. There's some economic stuff that we don't care about. That IPAs became trendy when those British expatriates came back, and they had grown to fancy them when they returned to India. And then the Great Exhibition of 1851 sparked a torrent of national pride in Britain. The Burton brewers reveled and cashed in on IPA's new domestic popularity. So this beer that was brewed in England and exported all the way to India and enjoyed by rich people took about 50 to 100 years, but then it suddenly became really popular in England. But in the late 1800s, the export market to India waned, so people the fancy people stopped drinking IPA, and tea, gin, and lager beer became more popular in India. And then in England, they changed the tax structure. So new taxes pressured British brewers to lower the beer's strength. And then they switched to producing these types of the IPAs, generally got weaker because of the taxes. And these became what we know as pale ales or bitters today. And so basically by around World War I-ish, IPA was almost extinct in England or anywhere. But then in the late 70s and early 80s, modern American craft brewers, intrigued by this romantic story, resurrected the style. And the brash, resiny hops that were available to American brewers, as opposed to the fruity ones from the British brewers, really took off. And so and it became sort of the craft beer darling. So like I can't think of offhand any craft brewery that doesn't make an IPA. You have to make IPAs now. It's like, that's the market. It's like 30% of the market at least. So that is the historical story of IPA, which gets us to American IPA. I wrote those words in 2014, so 6 years ago. A lot has changed since then. This was like the height of American IPA. But since then, in the last less than 10 years, 5 years even, is what we like to call the haze craze. So it's all about hazy New England IPAs now. Even though the numbers, as far as the economics, more of this beer is sold, but this gets all of the attention, the hazy IPAs. And so basically the difference between a traditional American IPA and a hazy New England IPA, this is a continuation of that classic style, but just with American type hops. Whereas this breaks all the rules, and it makes their own kind of, it makes a new kind of style. And this is how styles develop. But like I was saying before, that beer is made out of water, malt, hops, and yeast. The differences between these, what makes them different, there's a little bit of everything. A little bit difference in the water, a little bit of difference in the malt, a little difference in the hop, a lot of difference in the hops, and some subtle yeast things. And I'll try to get through. We're probably not. So I just wanted to talk about how to get from this to this. This is sort of the normal way of making beer. Like you make an American IPA, the normal way of making a beer. And the New England is the newfangled way. And one of the things, a lot of the techniques that led to New England IPA were actually developed by homebrewers. Because as the craft beer was exploding over the last, like exploding from 1,000 breweries to almost 85. Well, we'll see what happens after the turn at the economy balances out. But there are over 8,000 breweries in the country right now. But as this explosion was happening in these smaller breweries, a lot of the people running them did not come from a traditional brewing background. They came from a home brewing background. And so they didn't necessarily, they kind of played by their own rules. And they were not necessarily bound by the orthodoxy of sort of classically trained brewers. So now I just want to touch base on a couple of the differences in the ingredients that take us from a style of beer like, actually it looks nice with the light right there, a style of beer like this to a style of beer like this. So, like I say, beer is made out of water, malt, hops, and yeast. I'm not going to talk about water because it's boring, but there are differences. The main thing is the mineral content in the water, which is boring chemistry stuff. But by adjusting the salt content in the water, a classic classic American IPA and a classic Burton IPA or English IPA is generally made with water that is sulfite rich, has a lot of gypsum in it, and gypsum highlights the hop bite. So that helps you get a really crisp, in order to get a really crisp hop character, you want a lot of gypsum, sulfate. In New England IPAs, there's less sulfate and more chloride, calcium chloride. And basically what that does, it's flavor. It's the way that, if you salt your pasta, it makes the pasta taste better. It just kind of, it's flavor, it enhances flavors in certain ways. And what chloride does is it accentuates the malt. And it's funny, like up until 5 years ago, the concept, like me as a classically trained brewer from the older school, the concept of putting calcium chloride in a hop forward beer was just bonkers. But this is one of those things that people from the outside of the orthodoxy of brewing brought with them, and it's helped create this really cool new style. So that's the water. And then malt. So malt is what I like to call is the backbone of the beer. Malt is what makes beer beer. Okay, it is what the yeast turns into alcohol. So we get all the sugars from the malt, and so like by definition, beer is a malt-based alcoholic beverage. Malt just is a sprouted grain, and traditionally it's barley. In a classic American IPA, it's all barley. It's all malted barley, and that was like something really big. If you go back, to the development of the craft beer up until very, very recently, like within the last couple of years, it was a big hallmark was all malt, and that was, as it was considered, an all malt beer was considered a badge of honor, as opposed to what's an adjunct beer like Budweiser or Miller that put rice or corn or something that's not barley in because it's cheaper and it lightens the body up. In the early days of craft beer, and that was a huge thing, is that our beers are made of malt. We're not putting cheaper ingredients in, we're putting more expensive ingredients in. So American IPAs are generally all malt, all barley. And then we also almost always add a teeny little bit of what's called crystal malt or caramel malt. And what that does, if you notice,
same way to like separate whether COVID is real or not. Right?
If you notice the color difference, the caramel malt gives it that amber color. And so caramel malt is just roasted a little differently, and it gives it that color and a tiny little bit of sweetness. So that's, like I say, American IPA, the normal way of making beer. So that's kind of the normal, like other styles of beer follow that same model. New England IPA, on the other hand, uses a massive amount of what we call adjuncts. And adjuncts are like non-malted ingredients. So it could be flaked corn or rice or something to lighten the body up like they would do in an American style lager. But in New England IPA, we add tons, like 20, 30, 40% of the actual malt is, or grain bill, are these non-malted adjuncts that are generally oats or wheat. So they're not even barley. A lot of people use wheat. Aeronaut, we don't. We use mostly oats because we just like the way that it comes through in the beer. And the difference between using these unmalted oats or wheats is that they're full of protein. So the beer, this is full of carbohydrate to turn it for the alcohol. But by adding oats, you get a lot of protein. And like they're really, really long proteins. And it actually changes. You can feel it in your mouth. Like when you drink a New England IPA, it has like an unctuous, oily almost character to it. And that comes from the proteins that are contributed by the oats or the wheats. So it gives it like an oily, silky mouthfeel. But also these proteins, this might get a little complicated, change the solubility of the hops a little. And so in a New England IPA that has a lot of these proteins in it is going to get you're going to have a very unctuous, juicy hop character. So I need to speed it up here. So hops are the biggie. These are the big things. So in a traditional IPA, we add hops for bitterness and for a fruity, herbal, hoppy flavor. In order to get the bitterness out of the hops, you have to boil the hops, and that they're acids that are bitter. But people have tastes have changed. People don't like beer that is as bitter. So what we've done is over the last couple of years, brewers have kind of pushed the hops from early in the process where you get the bitter flavor toward later in the process where you get more of the aromatics. And we're also adding way more hops where, back in the day, a pound of hops per barrel was considered over the top. Sam Adams actually had ads about it. But some of these New England IPAs, people are adding 6, 7, 8, 10 pounds per barrel. And we're also adding them much later in the process, and we add them when the temperature is cooler. And what that does is it allows us to extract the juicy character rather than the bitterness. So by adding hops later, more hops later in the process at cooler temperatures gives us that juicy tropical hop. So I'm gonna have to wrap it up here a little faster because I talk too much. But the fourth ingredient is yeast. And this is another biggie with the hops. And this is a recently discovered or recently described technique where we call it dry hopping. And dry hopping, we do it in classic New England American IPAs, is you add the hops to the fermenting beer just to get the real good hop aromas and characters. In a regular American IPA, we add them after the yeast has done its stuff. But in New England IPAs, people started adding the hops earlier and earlier in the process into what's active fermentation. So the yeast, which is the fourth ingredient, in addition to transforming the alcohol into carbon dioxide, also does what we call, it's this brand new thing that is recently discovered, biotransformation of hop compounds. So what happens is the hops, these oils that are in the hops can have citrusy flavors or floral flavors, but the yeast during active fermentation can actually bind up with those hops and change them a little so that you actually have, it changes the compounds. So something that might originally have smelled like citrus will end up smelling like geraniums or petunias or something like that. And a lot of them are tropical, pineapple, papaya. And that is a hallmark of these New England, the biotransformation of the hops, hallmark of these beers. Yeast, we'll skip more of that. And so basically, what starts out as this, ends up as this, is by breaking all the rules. So someone like, back in my day, we would never make a beer like that just because it just broke all the rules. But what happened is this new generation of brewers did these three. The big takeaways are the heavy adjunct, lots of proteins, late, colder hop additions that minimize the bitterness, and the biotransformation of those to get the more tropical fruity notes are how you get from this to this. And so things that were once considered flaws are now, people are now waiting in line for, or trading over on the internet and spending tons of money on it. And, but they're both IPAs and they're both beautiful. And this is how beer evolves. And this is why beer is awesome. And one thing, as far as well-traveled beer goes, one thing that I do find somewhat ironic is that a beer that was originally designed to travel from, that originally came about because of its suitability for storing in the hold of boats to be traveled around Africa all the way to India months later. Now on the can, we always print, drink fresh, keep cold. So you never know. This is the way beer works. So, and it just goes to show you that beer is historic, but it's also dynamic and evolving. And yeah, so thank you for your patience. And please come by Aeronaut when we can open up again, because it's much more fun. This has been great fun, but it's much more fun to talk about beer when we're sitting at a bar across from each other. So cheers, everybody.
Mike, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate all the time that you've spent and your support for Boston for All and for Inside Voices. And just, I love your brewery. I miss you guys. I miss sitting in your store.
We miss you.
And I've spent the last 10 minutes just trolling the other breweries in the area and spreading rumors about them. So I hope that works out.
No, we're all friends. They're all friends of mine. Don't worry.
Okay, well, I can go back and edit them. The internet, once you put things on the internet, you can delete it.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for such an amazing night. We had an absolute blast with you all. The night is not quite over. We are going to give, Michael, can you just check what our stats are right now, and then I will go into the raffles for the evening. This is fantastic. We've raised over $1,000 for needy families. This is putting food on tables for people who are really hurting right now. So I hope all of you had a wonderful night. I hope you were able to, spend a couple hours, kind of get away.
Andrew, I'm stepping on you again. We have one more person. We're certainly not going to forget.
I'm so sorry. Steve,
listen.
Steve, I'm so sorry.
We're excited that you're here. This guy might be forgetting you. I'm not forgetting you.
Okay, I often forget.
That. Steve, I knew that. I think everybody needs to relax for a minute. It's an amateur organization. I know you're more acquainted with the more professional group, but we're doing our best here. Next up is Steve Almond. He's the author of 10 books of fiction, nonfiction, including the New York Times bestseller, Against Football and Candy Freak. His essays have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, and his short fiction has appeared in the Best American Short Stories. I actually think I have that book. It's great. For 4 years, he's hosted the Dear Sugars podcast with Cheryl Strayed, and he lives in Boston with his wife and his children, his debt, and his anxiety. Steve, we're so excited you're here. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you. What a nice evening. I haven't done one of these before. I host The Moth often, and it's great. And I miss hearing people's stories and also great music. I love what Michael played, and Alastair's a wonderful person. And I love all his music, as does my family, who was enthusiastically gathered around this little digital fireplace. my connection is unstable and I am unstable. So if I freeze, like wave your hands and either we'll be done or I'll find some way to unfreeze. I was so interested to hear these stories and I've been thinking about them. I was thinking about what Alyce was saying. She had this great line. She said, you think you know, but you don't know. And I think that is kind of describes how life operates, which is if you're paying any sort of attention, that you, as you get older, you get a greater sense of all the things you don't know. You are apprised of your ignorance, roughly or gently. In the case of somebody like Emma Woodhouse, it's rather rough. And for me, it's been a gradual sense of all the things that I don't know. There's this term woke, which I don't like very much, because really everybody is, to one extent or another, in a dream, a kind of delusion about the world around them and the world that's inside them, and they're slowly woken up, kind of like one incident at a time. And so I was thinking about this trip I took many years ago that was maybe one of these times where I kind of started to wake up from the dream I was in, which was that I was going to grow up to be a journalist. I thought, a serious journalist. I went to school and did practically only journalism. And after that, this is in the late 80s, I applied to all the newspapers in New England. There were still a bunch of newspapers in New England. I was desperate to get a job at a newspaper. I thought I would, the story I had was I'd become a serious journalist and I would go to the New York Times or something and my Jewish mother would be proud of me or not ashamed of me. And I applied to all these different papers and none of them wanted anything to do with me. I don't much blame them. There was one paper though in Quincy, Massachusetts that because the guy who was interviewing me had an interest in Kurt Vonnegut and I'd written an awful undergraduate thesis about Vonnegut, he sort of was a little bit more interested, but he didn't have a job. And so I went home with my tail between my legs and stayed with my folks for a couple of months. And then rather out of the blue, I got a call from a woman named Josie Cantu Weber in El Paso, Texas. She said she'd heard about me from an internship that I'd done and she offered me a job at the El Paso Times in El Paso, Texas. I was living in Northern California. I'd grown up in a suburb there. I had no idea really where El Paso was or what it was. And so I said, yes, that sounds good. I will take a job in El Paso, Texas, wherever that is. And I bought a used Toyota Corolla, the color of poop, and I packed everything that I owned in the car, which wasn't very much. And I went, this is how old this story is, I went to AAA to get a set of maps that would describe how you got down to El Paso. And I paid virtually no attention to how far it might be to El Paso. I just thought I'll do it in one day. And that turned out to be a rather bad decision, or maybe it was a good decision. At any rate, it was a decision. I got in my car at 6 or 7 in the morning and I drove for, I guess, about 18 hours. I drove down to LA and then I drove across California and across Arizona and down through New Mexico and into El Paso, Texas, which is right in the corner of Texas, right along the border with Mexico. I had no idea where I was going. And I remember seeing a sign on the highway, those signs that you see on the highway, and it said, El Paso, 11 miles. This is probably at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I had entered a kind of phantasmagoric state. Everything was sort of like Alastair was describing in that, the sort of being in these huts with all this smoke and this music playing. And he said, I got lost in it. That was the situation I was in. I just was completely kind of, the lights were all shimmery and I didn't know exactly where I was, but the sign told me I was 11 miles from El Paso. And then the next town on that sign was San Antonio. So it said El Paso, 11 miles. And then it said San Antonio, 592 miles. So that was where I was going, was a place that was really completely, the nearest big town was 500 miles away. And that first week that I got to El Paso, I was just sort of walking around in a haze because it was such a different, grown up in a suburb in California. I'd gone to New England for college, and this was the high desert and the border with Mexico. And I was just completely sort of mesmerized and dazzled by all of it. And I thought, okay, this could be an interesting experience. And then the phone rang in my office, and it was the editor from the Quincy Patriot Ledger. And he said, Almond, we've had, somebody's left the paper. We have a spot for you in Foxborough, Massachusetts. They're building a new stadium there for the football team, and we want you to come be a reporter in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And I thought, yeah, this is the story. I'm going to go to the Quincy Patriot Ledger, and that will lead to a job at the Boston Globe or the Philadelphia Inquirer, and eventually I'll get to the New York Times, and yes, I'll take your job. And then I had to tell my boss, who just hired me 4 days earlier, that I was leaving the paper. And she was absolutely just crestfallen and astonished at my vulgarity and idiocy and the sort of audacity of taking a job and immediately leaving. And I told her, and I immediately, almost immediately, I guess now I can see, started suffering a nervous breakdown. At the time, I just felt incredible anxiety. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I found myself weeping inconsolably all over the place. Joan Didion has this great line in Goodbye to All That, the essay about, you know, finding herself weeping in laundromats and Chinese restaurants. I was weeping everywhere I went. I remember eating this, you know, trying to, my friends, I had a couple of people I started to know a little bit, and they were quite concerned because I seemed to be having a nervous breakdown. So they kept taking me out to these great, cheap Mexican restaurants and getting me these wonderful plates of huevos rancheros that were just gorgeous. And I just kept weeping into my huevos rancheros. And I didn't know that I didn't want to leave El Paso. I had no inkling. It would take me many years to figure out that in our lives, there is some invisible hand that our inner life has in our fate. It's this line, actually, Alastair will appreciate it, and Andrew probably will too. John Prine has this line about your heart gets bored with your mind and it changes you. And that's really how I think life operates, is that you're only kind of a third aware really of what you want. You have ideas about what you think you want. And my body was trying to tell my brain, you don't want to leave this place. You don't want to go on this sort of track that's been set out for you that will end with you at the New York Times. That's what you think you want. That's what your superego wants. But that's probably not what all of you wants. And so that was something I just didn't know yet. And my body said, dude, you don't want to leave. You want to stay in this strange place. And so after about 4 or 5 days of fighting this and pretending that I was planning to leave and calling my brother in a panic and saying, hey, you got to come down here and help me pack up. I'm kind of losing my marbles. I finally realized that I did not want to leave El Paso. I wanted to stay. I had some sense that I wanted to have a different, more unconventional life than the one that I sort of felt I had to lead. And I think staying in El Paso, I stayed in El Paso for 3 or 4 years. And I think it was absolutely the best thing that I could have done. A lot of people have talked in their stories about, I'm thinking about American exceptionalism and about how important it is to defamiliarize yourself or step into a world that you're not familiar with. And that was very much what El Paso was like for me. I got an apartment in a dusty old building that overlooked the Rio Grande. And for people who haven't lived on the border, or especially in El Paso, it was a very strange thing for a kid from the suburbs who was used to just being an exceptional American, never questioning the story that I was born into, let alone the body or the gender, just thinking, here I am on third base. I must have hit a triple. And you could stare down when I would get my coffee in the morning and I would go out onto this porch, and you could look down onto the Rio Grande, which is the dividing line between Mexico and the United States. And you could see the day maids, the women who came, young women who came over from Juarez for the day to work in cleaning people's homes. And what they would do is their commute, the way that they would get to work, is that they would ride the shoulders of these guys who were called mulas. You'd pay them $1 or something, and they would take you across the Rio Grande, which was very dirty and also quite dangerous. People were continually drowning in the Rio Grande. So these women would get up on the shoulders of these guys. They would have their work clothes in a plastic bag set on top of their heads. And these guys would walk them over the Rio Grande, and then they would scamper up the embankment on the American side, and they would peel back this chain link fence that was called the Tortilla Curtain, and they would invade the United States. And they would stand there in the low scrub of the desert, and they would have to change into their work clothes because usually their clothes for crossing the river had gotten wet and dirty. And I would be watching all this, sipping my morning coffee, thinking, I've never seen this before. I guess I was born into a certain kind of American exceptionalism by no fault or achievement of my own. I just happened to be the one drinking the coffee in this scenario. It was always interesting to watch because these women were quite terrified that the INS, at that time it was called the INS, the Migra, would come and get them and deport them. They drove these puke green vans, and these women would be quickly trying to get themselves dressed, and then as quickly as possible running about 100 yards through the low scrub desert until they could get to South El Paso Street, where they could sort of blend in with the street life. And then they would go off to their jobs and clean houses, do some other menial tasks that an American wouldn't do for pay that an American wouldn't accept. And then when they were done at the end of the day, 8 or 10 or 12 hours later, they would go back to Juarez and presumably have dinner with their families. That was, that's what the border was like. I don't know I haven't lived there for many years, but that's really what it was like. And for me to have that experience at that time in my life was one of those moments where you realize you think you know, but you don't know. You think you know, but you have no idea. You have no idea how big and complicated the world is and how much suffering it contains. And you really have no idea who you are and what your share of responsibility is for that suffering. Hopefully, as you grow older in life and you have more travels, and you're lucky enough to have more travels, you are made aware of your great good fortune. This is a moment, I think, in our national history where a certain kind of inequality is being laid bare within our country. And so hopefully some of us are becoming aware of the great good fortune of the story that we were born into. And of course, other people are being made aware or made aware again of how vulnerable the story is that they were born into. But I was very grateful that I had a nervous breakdown on that at the end of that journey and was able to stay in El Paso for a few years and start to figure out some of the things that I didn't know before that trip. And I'm just delighted at all the stories that people told and what you guys are doing, Jeremy and Andrew. I think it's just fantastic. And I'll come back for your guys' next event. And I loved all the stories that everybody told and all the music that people played. It was great. If Michael could figure out a way to get us all beer, I think it would be even better, but we'll wait till next time for that.
Steve, thank you so much. I'm sorry my mic was muted because you didn't get to hear, holy crap, you got Steve Almond? So we couldn't be more thankful that you were here with us tonight. We're really excited about some of the stuff that people like you and the rest of the storytellers and all of you who came tonight, with the gift that you have given not only the people who are going to benefit for the money we raised tonight, but me personally. For 2 hours once every 3 weeks or once a month, you give me the gift of feeling like everything is normal for 2 hours. And it's the most blissful thing that I could ever ask for. And I could not be more thankful for, the work that Michael Boezi's doing, the work that Jeremy's doing, and your, just the gift that you've given me and so many countless people that we've helped over the last few months. It's meant so much. Jeremy, did you want to mention something? Were you good with me bringing it up? make sure
you know what? Before you do that, I'm just going to mention, just so everybody knows. So first of all, again, I as well want to thank everybody for everything. All of you, you were really great. Everyone who came. I mean, I love that this happens. I love that everybody can come. I love how much I get to just enjoy the great things that people do. So thank you all for being so great. I also just want to point out, so that way everybody knows, our total for tonight is $1,135 that we raised. That's going to go directly to the Family Relief Fund. Everybody, thanks so much for being part of that. That was all I wanted to say there.
Fantastic. Steve, I want to relate to you on a very specific level. I think it is really important when you go to a breakfast establishment to do the calculus and to look around and to decide for yourself, is this place capable of making a reputable huevos rancheros?
Strong agree.
It's absolutely delicious, and people phone it in. They phone it in. They throw it on the menu, and it's not right. So
not El Paso, they don't.
Yeah, so Jeremy and we went on a Thelma and Louise road trip back in 2006, and we had a convertible, and I had huevos rancheros up the entire California coast, and magnifique. Before we close out the night and before we thank you all once again, I wanted to take a second. We're going to do a couple raffles. This is the first time we've done raffles before. We're going to raffle off some gift certificates for some beer. We have a gift certificate to Aeronaut Brewery, who Aeronaut is doing curbside purchases. I believe they're doing curbside. You cannot go inside, but believe me.
Correct. Yeah.
And Screaming.
You email it in. I think and delivery.
Oh, you have delivery?
Yeah. Check the website.
Okay.
It's not my department, but.
No, you're making dreams come true. Thank you so much. And Screamin' Hill Brewery is in Central Jersey. They unfortunately do not do delivery to Massachusetts, so you would have to go there. But I've sampled beer from both breweries. Both are fantastic. My wife was going to do the raffle, and she may have left me. Hey.
But like left you, or just isn't there right now? Because
I'm clear. Hold on a second. Jeremy, hey people.
Let's just be clear. They haven't. In case everybody's wondering, they haven't been married that long. So if she left him, it might actually be an annulment. It's not a divorce, so everybody don't worry. It's actually much quicker and easier.
Yeah.
But I think she's probably just helping the dog right now.
Yeah, we got married on September 28th.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, with a pandemic, forever, it's a really long time. All right, hold on a second, everyone. Hold on. All right, so the first raffle is for the
Oh boy.
All right, so here we go. So
there's a randomizer. We're using a randomizer.
We used a randomizer. We randomly selected. So there's a possibility that that the people, you have to be here right now to be able to win this. And Michael, do we want to have people say yes in the chat if you're okay with being selected for winning?
Just say a name and I'll work it out.
You think I'm going to the clink for you, buddy?
Just say a name.
I don't have names. I have email addresses. So,
okay, perfect.
For the Aeronaut gift certificate, the winner is Robin5850@yahoo.com.
Is Robin there?
Yep, that's me.
Yay!
Yay! Joel and Robin. All right.
Oh my gosh, Robin!
That's Robin. Hi.
This is so exciting. I went to high school with Robin Hall. Salt of the earth.
Super excited. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Welcome, guys.
All right, so we have one more raffle. This next raffle is it involves a road trip, but I guarantee you it is worth it. The brewery is on this beautiful farm. You're close to great adventure. If you want to leave there and go to Six Flags, if the world ever opens back up and the zombies don't eat us, I think it's a good option. So the next potential, it is Kirsty Bennett at mit.edu. Are you, Kirsty, are you still here?
Oops.
Kirsty may have left.
Well, wait. Do you know how to reach Kirsty though?
I do. Yeah.
And you know her.
I know her. Yeah.
So I think you can tell Kirsty that she won.
I'm happy to do that. Everyone, I think I speak on behalf of everyone tonight. I think this hands down has been the most fun that we have had at one of these nights. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for helping other people and for getting out with us. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I hope you enjoyed traveling with us this evening, and we love you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.